Hello, I'm Rosalía Valero. Very happy to see you all here today. And I'm going to be telling you some interesting things about lessons for Latin America from a higher education research project that started in the UK a bit of time ago, not too long ago. I shouldn't have said that. It's about to do with the impact of English language test choices in higher education. This project is a collaboration resulting from the work of the British Council, the University of Cambridge, Cambridge University Press and Assessment, and the University of Dundee. First time ever that these four organizations have joined forces, and that's why you see the different logos that I'm showing you here. So, what is the background for this? We have seen that different higher education language tests being used for admission purposes are now in the landscape of the different choices that are found available all over the world. But this research study specifically focuses on the UK. So this is what this project is about, because different choices were taken, especially during the COVID years, where, the circumstances made it impossible for all the usual exams and tests that universities were using. The candidates, the people who wanted to go and study at those universities, simply couldn't take those tests in many cases. So there were new available options, and these new available options found an open door, right? But this was back in 2019, and we thought it was time to have a look at what was happening and maybe see how the choices had been made, why, etc., and if institutions, higher education institutions in general, were happy with the results and what had been happening as a result of all those new tests coming into play here, right? So it's basically about this principle. And when we carry out a research study, we have to have research questions, because this is what we will be basing the study on, right? So you have RQ, stands for research question. So the number one was, what is the prevalence of different tests at UK higher education institutions? In other words, which tests are being used now? Number two, what are the perception of university staff towards the various English language tests before being used for admission? Okay, and then we have question number three, how are decisions made around which tests to include? Because we're talking about the admissions staff at a university. So in some cases, as we know, these people are not necessarily English language teaching colleagues, but they usually get a list of possible options that they can accept. And then question four, how do internal students cope? What has it meant for students now studying at these universities in the UK, the fact that they took one of those new options? So there's something we call duty of care, whereby you need to make sure that you are using something that is suitable. This is important because the duty of care is both to the institution itself. This means if you are part of the admissions staff, you have to make sure that you are opening the door to students that universities will be proud of having as part of their institutional community, right? But also that these students can really make the most of their time. Maybe it started as virtual time and then it became right there and then in the UK when it was possible after we got the COVID vaccines, etc. But how are they doing? Did the fact that they took some of these tests really help them, or are they facing challenges as a result of that new range of tests that started becoming okay for them to take? Okay, so in other words, they took the test, they were admitted, And how about them? How are they doing? Are they managing to succeed because of what they use to prove their skill in English language? Okay. Now, with any research study, you need to have a methodology. So when you go for a mixed approach, for example, you go on quantitative and qualitative research options, right? So this is basically, I'm not going to read to you bit by bit, but you can see there was desk-based research, so things that you can go and basically find online, right? There were surveys, and usually you send those online now. You don't have to send printed hard copies, right? Interviews. So we're talking about you don't choose A, B, or C, etc., but it's actually somebody talks to you and you answer questions, etc. That is on an individual basis, but you can also have focus groups, right? And in this case, it was the students. So as you can see, all these things have been carried out. All the initial steps have been carried out, right? And that's why we can have now preliminary results to share with you. So let's have a look at the desk-based research first, okay? This is some of the things, right? It was 35 British universities. The Times Higher Education in 2023, every year they rank the universities. So we look at the ones that have been ranked in 2023, and they were chosen for this first round of survey, right? Analysis. So from a total of 120 possible institutions, only 35 were selected, okay? Universities that were not regarded as options were the ones with fewer than 10% of international student intake. This means that it was not really a significant number of international students. So for them, the decision of which English tests to choose to allow applicants to use was not really that important. And 5 institutions that you cannot find in the Times Higher Education ranking were also added. All right. So what did we see? I'm sure you have heard about IELTS because it's the most popular English language test in the world. IELTS was obviously there. And it turns out that what we have been saying to the world, you can trust IELTS if you want to study at a UK university or do many other important things in your life. IELTS was the preferred choice for an English language test at higher education in the United Kingdom, right? Most of top 25 universities, they require a minimum. So they tell you, and you know, for IELTS, you have the scores, right? So 6.5 or 7 for both undergraduate, that's UG, or postgraduate, right? PG, for that sort of entry. In other cases, it was 6, right? Usually, the more popular, let's say, university, because of its ranking, because it has great staff and the research work is amazing, etc., they will ask you for a higher score. So these you have to, if you're thinking of going to the UK, you have to research yourself and see what the requirement is. Okay. So the IELTS scores, there were other tests. And by the way, I'm not going to be mentioning the other tests by name. You will have the QR code to go and check the report itself, but I myself will not be mentioning the names of other tests as out of respect for other colleagues that are here presenting also at this event. All right. So you will see that when it's a higher ranking university, they tend to be more explicit, very, very clear with the sort of requirements that they have to get there, okay? So, and remote testing obviously had a place here because it was the only choice in many cases, in many countries where this could happen. However, when it comes to remote testing, there is also the option that it could be home based, right? This was not preferred, I mean, because of security, because at the time when we were starting with home based tests, things were really new in many ways, right? Things have changed a long way now, but at the time, not really something they preferred. So, as I told you, we have preliminary results, and this is where I think you will start to see very interesting things. I've highlighted for you the important bit of information. So, as with any survey, you can ask 100 people. That doesn't necessarily mean that you will get 100 responses, right? So we sent the survey to people. For this particular question, we got 67 responses, right? And the question was, did your university expand the range of English language tests accepted during the pandemic? You can see it was a majority here. So the answer was yes. Why is that? Because universities, obviously, not just in the UK, but everywhere in the world, wanted to keep on having students studying at the university, right? You will see, and this might be interesting to you, that the third choice is not sure. Remember, this is the staff admission, okay? And in many cases, they simply get a list, an updated list. They may or may not remember what the previous list had included, okay? But in other places, they were really sure, so they said yes, or they were sure that they hadn't expanded the choices, etc. So it was a no. How about this one? Has your university since changed this decision? So before, the question was, did you start accepting different language tests so that applicants could prove their level of English, right? And this time the question was, well, pandemic has gone, right? How about now? Has your university since changed the decision? In other words, you opened the door to new tests. Have you now decided to take those tests out again? And look at the answers. And this is where it really gets very interesting, because you have more than half of these universities saying, yes, I have changed my decision. And this is powerful. And this is why I think it's something very interesting for Latin American universities to have a look at what this survey has resulted in, and how these could affect maybe our own Latin American decisions. Because what happened in the UK also happened here. We know that for a fact, okay? Why did they decide to say no to those exams that they had said yes before? Well, these are their reasons, okay? Security concerns. And remember, I told you, in many cases, usually if it was something that the applicants could take at home, it was not a preferred option, so they tended to say no, okay? But still, if you talk about digital exams, I think taking things online, etc., many people say, not really sure. I think I really prefer face-to-face, where we can see that they are there, that nobody's cheating, where somebody can actually talk to a person, not just start talking and looking at a camera and being recorded, etc., right? So things like validity, obviously hugely important when we talk about assessment. And then the natural apprehension felt in many places around the world by many people. And here we're not just talking about age issues, I would like to stress, but apprehension about online testing in general. Still not as trustworthy for many people as the traditional approaches, right? And then this perception that they are not really, these students that were accepted by these universities because of the test that was new on that list of tests that could be used for admission. The students took that test, and the universities can see that a number of those students that were accepted using some of these new tests, and I like to stress some of these new tests, right? They were not performing as they were expected to perform. In other words, it was not really a happy situation for the students themselves, but it was also not a happy situation for the institution, right? Because you had those students. So it all seems to indicate that their level of English was not good enough, and probably they wouldn't have been accepted if they had taken the usual tests. But those tests, let's remember, were not available at the time, okay? So what does this tell us? Well, there are things that we have to take into account, because after all, when you carry out research, you want to look at the results and see how you can improve things, whether you have to change things, whether you're happy with what is happening, whether what you thought would happen is really happening, and if not, why not, and what you would like to do or what you would have to do. Because remember, these universities have a responsibility. You accepted students, and so you have to support them now that they're part of your community, right? So you have to remember, if you're having struggling students at your institution, at your university, it's a problem. And the problem, as I said, it's not just for the students because they're finding it hard, because basically they haven't got the right level of English, or the ideal level of English, or the right quality of English, right? In this case, you're going to carry out studies. So it has to do with academic English. It's not just general English, right? Was this taken into account when they took that test? Was this part of the, was it one of the elements that created that test, that test was measuring, right? So it's not easy. There are challenges now that these institutions and the students are facing. But as I said, the students have to be supported because they were accepted. They didn't do anything wrong. And here we're not trying to point fingers or finding blame, etc. But those students, we always have to remember, didn't do anything wrong, right? There has to be further research, and it has to be clearer for the universities that there are choices. So what can happen? We need to go with the next part in the research project, because as I said, the results have been fascinating. And what it has made us think of, and I'm not part of the research team itself, but I of course feel myself involved because it's my university there, right? So a framework can be a very useful thing, and a framework that can be used for university staff and that can help support the admission staff sounds like a very good idea. So that plus language assessment literacy for stakeholders involved. This means knowing about the evaluation system elements, etc., so that they can take care of the right decisions. Sadly, we know of cases in Latin America where we go and decisions are made on prices, right? Yes, this is a good test, but but there's this one and it's cheaper, much cheaper, right? So we'll go for the cheap one. So it's not a huge cost to our students, right? Duty of care, you know, I mentioned before. So universities have the responsibility to make informed decisions, but we can support them and we can help them, and we should through things like, for example, this framework for evaluating tests and helping with language assessment literacy, right? And guess what? This is where I say it can be really exciting for Americas, because these are lessons that we can take into account, but there's also something in the future. These comes from the test, from the research report, right? The methodology should be replicated somewhere else. Americas, for example. So if you like what you've heard, sad news, I know, but I mean, if you like the fact that this research project is being carried out, you would like to know more about it, and you would like to see when, if it happens here in the Americas, you can be included, this is where you go. As I said, lessons that come from the UK, but I'm sure that here in Latin America, we can really use some of those lessons and learn and do things better and make sure when we say yes to those applicants and we say, yes, you can come to my university, we know that they're likely to succeed, to have a great time. Thank you.